Welcome to Place Branding Australia, the podcast, Series 1, Episode 2.
Place Branding Australia. Place Branding Australia.
For those of you that are joining us for the first time, we're doing this podcast for Australians that are interested in and work in place to provide them with a bit of food for thought and an introduction to some of the leading place branding and identity practitioners in the country. In these first couple of weeks in particular, we're focusing on a couple of speakers that will be speaking at Place Branding Australia, the conference, which is on March 9 to 11 down in Hobart. My name is Stu Spears. I'm the curator and MC of Place Branding Australia, the conference, and I've been working in the space for probably the last 5 or 6 years. With those introductions out of the way, I'm very excited to welcome our guest for this episode, Andy Hoyne, the founder and principal of Hoyne. Andrew is the founding partner of Hoyne, who are 31 years young this year. They are Australia's largest place visioning, place branding and property marketing agency. Andrew and his team have collaborated with major Australian and international developers, councils and government agencies to create highly recognisable landmarks and communities. He's seen firsthand how the power of effective place branding and place making can transform communities, and is passionate in his belief that we can do more to create more meaningful places for all people. This has led him to publish The Place Economy, a series of resource books that look at the social and economic impact of best practice placemaking. Hoyne are considered global thought leaders and innovators and developing unique new processes, frameworks and services. And on a personal note, when I first found myself stumbling into this space about 5 or 6 years ago, Andy and his book, The Place Economy, the first volume, was somewhat seminal for me in getting a better understanding and a better grip of what this sector actually was. So with that as the introduction, Andy, it's a total thrill to be speaking to you today. And welcome to Place Branding Australia, the podcast.
Wow, thanks, Stu. That's a fantastic introduction. And what a cool thing for you to say that the place economy has such a positive effect. That I love hearing things like that. It's such a huge amount of work and energy and money too. But when I hear people say such positive things about what they've gotten out of the first book and hopefully the whole series, it makes it feel worth it.
Yeah, they're really powerful volumes of they're almost encyclopedias of place, I suppose. Was that the undertaking that you meant to do when you undertook the project?
It's interesting because I think the first volume of The Place Economy was about my 14th book, and maybe the 13 previous to that were nowhere near as substantial and very visually driven. And, you know, I'd written bits in other than design, photography. There was a range of different themes, and they were a hell of a lot of fun. But I think with The Place Economy, I was very focused on digging deep into areas of expertise that I could share with others around the world to understand what we all need to do as an industry to create better experiences for our communities. And so in doing that, there was just such an endless array of topics that I wanted to cover. And I think the first one at about 410 pages seemed fairly substantial at the time. But then 2 years later, I launched Volume 2, which is 560 pages. And I've got to admit, I probably deleted about 7 or 8 articles because I couldn't fit them in. And now that I'm about to launch Volume 3, it's currently sitting at about 700 pages. It's just
awesome.
Wow. And I get to speak to so many interesting people. And look, for me, it's like a PhD. You know, it's how I learn. Yeah. So I'm getting to learn and I'm getting to share that with others.
How wonderful. And the thing that really gets me about the way you've structured the books is you're coming at it from all angles. There's a subject that's pretty broad and can be sometimes hard to define, but it's up to each and every one of us to sort of come up with our own definition of it, I think. And this book and the different practitioners that you interview and record the thoughts of sort of leads to people being able to create their own definition, I think, from my reading anyway.
Yeah, I'm always asking myself, what would someone who's only interested in social value and benefit or engaging communities and has no interest in money think of this? And at the same time, I'm asking myself, what would a mainstream developer who is focused on feasibility, timing, delivery, and profit margins think of this? So I've got both of those voices in my head, and I actually want to engage both of those audiences to see that we actually need to do both. Like what we need is a social and an economic solution, and one requires the other to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, such awesome pieces of work. Can't recommend them highly enough. And we'll maybe touch on that a little bit later in the interview. But the first thing I actually wanted to ask you today, Andy, as I've just sort of touched on, place branding to me is a relatively new practice and something that we're all wrapping our heads around gradually. And at times when I need to explain it to other people what place branding is about, I can find it a little bit difficult. Is there a way in which you go about describing what place branding is to your clients and people that ask you the question?
Yeah, sure. Look, I really think about place branding as a strategic blueprint. So the way I talk about it is that it needs to represent a plan for overarching growth and development. And it's something that can't be just achieved with an icon or a logo or a bit of marketing material. You know, we're used to seeing those sassy slogans and cool graphics, and they might look a bit pretty, but they're not strategic drivers for actually helping us create improved livability and, very importantly, pride. And so I think we need to think very consciously about these new platforms for business opportunities, and job growth, I think, is an enormous component of thinking about place branding, because ultimately what we want to do is increase visitation. And that doesn't always mean tourism. That can often mean visitation by locals. So for me, a place brand is about creating competitive commercial advantage. And what we want to do through that process, combining it with some sort of support messaging, is to communicate why should people visit? You know, why should people come here and even open a business or invest or like, you know, put money down in terms of what might happen for their future? So an effective place brand needs to really kind of drive attraction of investment, visitation, talent attraction. If you're an employer, you need to strengthen the prominence of the place and whatever's being made or exported or the area is actually becoming famous for. And I think that what often happens is place branding can fail when, you know, certain practitioners take the approach that it's just the same way that you might brand a service or a product. Like, we're not branding a Mars bar, or we're not branding a sports product. You know, when we think about place branding, it has to be very unique with regard to those considerations and processes, knowing how it's going to be used in the market. And so when I think about the different facets that you've got to account for that, you know, it has to include the cultural, social, economic, and geographic. And that's quite complex. And that's why selling a location demands a really deeply considered solution. And that starts with these key pillars within the community and not just a logo.
And something that strikes me about that is that logos in the form that we know them, and the ads that we see and the logos on products, for example, there's an endpoint there. It's finished when that logo is delivered. Place branding to me feels like something that's a continuous journey, and it's never really finished. You're constantly building on, and you're constantly building for the future with the place.
Absolutely, because it's all about adding increased value. And so it's not just about a logo and a bit of collateral. It's about there always is a logo, but the logo is really just the embodiment of the values, the experiences, the messaging. But most of all, what you expect to have as an experience when you come to a place, and how it can actually connect you to what makes it unique or bespoke, or what is that history, or what is the aspiration of that location that will continue to further differentiate itself.
And I'd like to pick you up on a point you've just made there as well about community visitation. And the word you used in the midst of that was pride. Are those two things inherently linked? It's a local's pride that will help to drive the economic development that you're talking about?
Look, without a doubt, I feel incredibly strongly about this, and I talk about the notion of pride a lot because I'd say that half the projects, at least, that we work on, I go to places and I think, wow, there's a big lack of self-belief in this area. And people think, I live here because it's cheap, or I live here because I'm just kind of stuck here. And I hear a lot of kind of negative commentary about the decisions that people have made. And I believe that my job is in part to actually paint a picture for what's possible in future. And for me, it's interesting when I talk to people about the work that we do and they assume it's all about festivals and food trucks or, fun stuff. And I'm like, no. First and foremost, it's about jobs. It's always about jobs. How do we actually do work that creates quality jobs? And when people are doing quality jobs and earning quality money, that actually has a direct impact on the lifestyle they lead and the amount that they can contribute to the education and the value that their family can have in a particular location. So for me, that all comes back to pride. I want to make sure that the people that we're collaborating with, whether they're planners, architects, landscape architects, events organisers, it doesn't matter. Everybody in that ecosystem is playing a role in changing the way the people who live in a particular area view their own place and what it means to them. And so we need to be constantly thinking about how do we actually help people feel more proud about the decision that they've made to live in a particular location.
Yeah, so interesting. We've sort of touched on it already, but there's a little bit of an uneasiness, I think, with the word brand and the fact that it actually includes itself in the title of the subject we're talking about, place branding. So I'm going to take you back to a Year 12 English exam now and put an essay question to you, and I'd like to hear how you'd actually go about answering this question, if I may. So there's a question put to you. The phrase is, place branding needs a new name. Discuss.
It probably does too. Look, the funny thing is that I think there are a lot of terms like placemaking and place branding that there's a lack of clarity from people with regard to what they mean, and place branding is a great example of that. And I really fear that people think it's quite Machiavellian to attract people to a certain location with branding, and that's really not how we should be engaging them. But actually, we need to change that perspective, because what we're trying to do is an optimistic endeavour. We're actually trying to create a positive experience and create and deliver value. And so what we want to do is amplify positive differences and celebrate what makes a place unique. And so, we need a new way to do that, whether, it's a new name or a new approach to explain this as a process, which truly articulates the kind of value it brings. And the way that we've been talking about it in our business, instead of calling it place branding, we've been calling it place max.
Place max, M-A-X?
Yep.
Right.
Just because I'm trying to kind of create terms and descriptions that avoid confusion, because, these terms have existed for a long time and people have different ideas about what they mean. And so that's why, for a lot of the kind of services and processes that we have at Hoyne, we're constantly creating our own names to describe them, so they are, bespoke. They're really not saying, oh, this is what everybody thinks. All I'm saying is this is what I think and this is the way I approach it.
Yeah. And how does Place Max work in with your place visioning that Hoyne's put together, the framework that place visioning is?
So for a lot of the projects we do, place visioning is the first step. It's about understanding and analysing a place, what is there, what opportunity exists, and how built form can be created to actually meet the needs both socially and economically. Again, whether it's different sort of typologies, whether it's residential, commercial, retail, etc. But it can also be educational, health, or just experiential. It can just be a park with amenity. So place visioning is about understanding how do we create that destination and what are the ingredients we require to deliver on it. And then that really dovetails directly into what we would call placemaks, which is to say, okay, how do we take these ideas and turn them into a narrative? What are these things that we believe are real today but are promised for tomorrow? And how can we communicate them to a range of different audiences, from local residences, from local businesses, but also as an attractor to bring new people to live and work in a particular place? And so that means kind of maximising the assets that you have. And that means kind of spending more time kind of providing a bigger focus on some of the attributes. And so the idea of placemaks evolves that into not just a narrative and a positioning, but actually a strategic plan on execution, and often a brand identity and a range of different collateral that supports that.
Okay. And the phrase visioning inherently within that is a forward-looking thing. To what extent does the place's past come into how you actually go about creating that visioning process?
I think that history is one of the very first things that you want to do anywhere you go, because history is what makes most places distinct and bespoke and unique. And I think that's one of the most important things that we need to do, is differentiate, is understand the persona or the DNA of a place and amplify it. And so in visioning, while it's a future-focused mindset, it can actually take advantage of an existing attribute like history, but just tell the story better, or actually find a new way to take it to a new audience. And so I think that taking advantage and leveraging sort of anything historical is ideal. But in many instances, it's not possible, because sometimes you might be in a greenfield environment where there's just nothing there and there's really nothing to leverage. But when you've got a tool like history, or any other existing story, or a built form, or a structure, or something that happened before, that's the starting point of that storytelling process.
And I suppose the key hook for generating that pride that we were talking about before as well.
Absolutely, because everything should be based on truths.
All right, well, maybe taking ourselves away from the philosophy and the theory of place branding, it'd be great for you to just to hear from you a little bit about the history of Hoyne. You're, as you said, 31 years young this year. Take us through your career pre-Hoyne, your establishment of Hoyne, its evolution as a business, and what you've enjoyed as its founder.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and interestingly, I often don't think further back than about 2 years, because it's all about the decisions that you're making and how you can kind of implement them and as you evolve. But look, I started the business in '91. I was like a lot of graphic designers, which is what I described myself at the time, doing logos and brochures and posters, etc. And it was a hell of a lot of fun, to be honest. And I ended up opening a number of other creative or design businesses in the early 90s, which I built up and sold one or two of those. And that was pretty interesting, because a number of those took me around the world quite a few times to present, sell, attend fairs, speak at conferences. But it was interesting because I was working for a lot of charities pro bono. And my wife often says today that, I've kind of landed in the space that I have not accidentally. And that's this notion that there's a lot of pessimism around the property development industry, that, we're just kind of making money for rich people. But I actually see the property industry with a very different lens, and I think we're creating incredible communities, for families. And yes, for some people, there's an opportunistic approach to investment. It does play a big role in the financial sort of structure of most countries. But for me, it's actually about creating meaningful places. And so all my work at not-for-profits and my work in the property sector kind of dovetailing together is actually how I ended up developing the kind of thinking behind place visioning, or this pretty much the philosophy behind the place economy, this idea of, social and economic benefits equaling, great outcomes. But to kind of properly answer your question, so in that 31 years since I started, the business has evolved somewhat, and it's worked in a range of different sectors. I was originally in Melbourne. We still have a pretty sizable and robust team in Melbourne, a bunch of super smart people. Obviously, I'm based in Sydney. We've got a team in Brisbane. We do a lot of work all around New Zealand. I'm a huge fan of New Zealand. I just love going there, although I can't get there at the moment with the border controls. But yeah, look, I think what's been really amazing about working in property, which I didn't really start doing until about 99, is it's given me the ability to look very broadly at the experiences that people have, and whether I'm looking at place branding or place visioning or property marketing, they're three different streams, but they often overlap.
Well, actually, you've just essentially posed the next question that I was going to ask, actually. So you've got quite a unique perspective in the sense that there's a micro level of understanding that you have because of your work with individual properties, and then Hoyn's gone on to work for, my understanding is regions and cities, and you have a really good understanding and feel for nation branding as well. So we're really going from an apartment block being built around the corner all the way up to what a nation brand looks like. Is there something that strings all of those things together? What are the fundamentals or the shared principles that you could draw between the apartment building around the corner and the place brand for Australia?
I think the first thing I'd say is that you want to understand how people feel and what their aspirations are. And you're going to want to tap into the notion of the way people see the future. The way that they actually, everybody aspires to better, that we aspire to live in a better place or, have better things. And that doesn't always mean, goods, but it's actually about the feelings that we have. And we know that when we live in a place that we love, it just makes us feel great. We feel proud. We feel safe. And whether it's with ourselves or with our families. And I think on a greater scale, you can apply that to nation branding, that there's a sense of pride, there's a sense of connectedness, there's a sense that we are not the same as somewhere else. It's not about being better or worse. It's just about acknowledging who and what you are, your history, and what your aspirations are for the future. And so I think that there are a lot of things that link the kind of mindset that takes you through that strategic journey to arrive at a solution for something small, like a local sort of place brand, or even something substantial like a national one.
Interesting. So the word that's coming to my mind there is a sense of authenticity, irrelevant of the size here. If people are authentic about who they are and what their aspirations are, then we can really start to find out what's unique about them and their place.
Yeah, it's funny. I've you got your own bugbears about certain things in life, and I do love the word authenticity, but I have a tendency not to use it. I always say that the second you say you're authentic, you're immediately inauthentic. It's like someone else can say it about you or about what you're doing, but you can never say it about yourself. And maybe it's because working in this industry, particularly that words like luxury, oh my God, it can be used for a stuffed koala. And, the other one that I really struggle with is the word icon. I mean, the Sydney Opera House is an icon, but very few buildings in this country are icons, and yet it gets bandied about left, right and centre. And I think that we've got to be really conscious about the way that we talk and describe things with a sense of accuracy, because the sense of giving people this idea of things being something they're not, it just feels like you're lying to them. And I think the last thing you want to do with branding or marketing is give the impression that you're full of bullshit. People have got to kind of go, you know what, that would pass the pub test, or I believe what that guy's actually saying to me. And if they can't feel that, I think you've got a problem from the offset.
Well, perhaps another way to put that, or to use another word for authenticity, is truth. I know in the work that I do, the most powerful moments in the interviewing and getting to understand the communities I work with are probably 30, 40 minutes into talking to someone, because inevitably the first 20 minutes is sort of talking about the weather and getting a feel for each other and making sure that I'm a trusted individual that you can share your story with. But it's really after that 30 or 40 minute mark, I find generally in engagement, that truth starts to come out. And that truth is really where you start to tap into pride, it seems to be a recurring theme of what we're talking about today.
Mate, you're bang on. I love the word truth. And, when we're doing our work the same, it's about at the beginning, let's figure out what all the truths are. Not what we want it to be or we'd like it to be. What are the actual truths? What are the place truths? What are the experience truths? And once you actually get down to those facts, it enables you to look at things with a very clear lens and actually start to understand where opportunity exists. So, yeah, I like your perspective on that.
It's just, I'm going to go for a blatant plug on the conference here, but it's just brought to mind one of the sessions that we've got with Scott Rankin from Big Heart on the Wednesday of the conference, and he's exploring the fact that if there isn't social justice across your community, then you're not really maximising your potential as a place. And that social justice really requires transparency and truth about what's actually happening in your community. So in terms of being excited about certain sessions in the conference, I'm really looking forward to Scott's actually on the Wednesday.
Great, me too.
So you've touched on that there's an overwhelming sense of optimism coming out of you, Andy, I must say, and it's wonderful. And I think it's something that place branding is really great for, because it just gives people the opportunity to spell out and admit to their truth and talk about what their aspirations are for a future. What is it? That's clearly something that excites you about the profession. Is there anything else that really fires you up and gets you out of bed in the morning when it comes to this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about what I do as a job, what gets me out of bed every morning, and, what I see as having incredible potential with regard to change. And that would be the ability to create positive social change, but at all levels of society. Not just when you think about property, you think about places where people are wealthy. But, with our book, all our money goes to Habitat for Humanity, 100% of it. We've raised, $150,000 just in that alone. I've been involved in a lot of other organisations and still am. And I think that for me, that's incredibly important to actually look at people in our society who are really probably having the hardest time, and to understand how do we actually create some sense of equality? How do we actually try to think about built form, about affordability? And these are really there's a whole bunch of themes and topics that are a huge deal in this country right now, as they are in many other countries. We don't have all the solutions. I was on the board of directors of the Big Issue magazine for 7 years, and we actually ran it out of our office for a period of time. I was even the editor for a short period of time. And so, homelessness, I think, shouldn't exist in a country like Australia. I mean, you wouldn't want it to exist anywhere, but in such a country that is so wealthy, that has, the sort of the structures that we do, and the education, and the funding for so many parts of what people want in society. I just don't understand why homeless even exists at all.
Well, I'm going to come back to this word pride again, and I suspect you may well have touched on the answer to my next question, but looking back over your career, and you mentioned there's probably a 2-year time period you keep your mind fixed on, is there a project in particular that you think back on and really are quite proud to have been involved in? What was it? What were the outcomes that really made you feel that pride within yourself?
I'm really excited by a project that we started about 7 or 8 years ago, called Woodley, in the western suburb, in the outer western suburbs of Melbourne. It's a joint venture between our clients Mirvac and VIP. And what I love about Woodley was it was just a big patch of red earth and bits of grass. And now it's a community of over 8,000 people living in a town centre that's only been alive for the last handful of years. And what I love is that the brand for Woodley is so compelling. It actually does really emanate this sense of pride and aspiration for a new approach to living in Melbourne's West. And traditionally, living in Melbourne's West was, a poor man's choice. But what we have, contributed to creating is a really connected community with, beautiful green spaces, 5 or 6 separate schools, 20 different parks and playgrounds, a really kind of leading edge local town centre with shops and amenity, and, public transport, which is evolving. And so for me, it's a benchmark of what other master plans should be doing. And the branding that we did for Woodley is, again, not just a logo, but it's a symbol of what has been achieved and why an incredibly strong multicultural community have banded behind it and have engaged in all sorts of massive events, from a thing we call Flavour Fest, which is a big multicultural food festival, to soccer events and sporting events, and just to go out there some days and see the hive of activity in a place that only 6 or 7 years ago was a patch of dirt.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. And are there any metrics that you can take from the community itself to say, look, that's a community that's doing really well. They're mentally, physically well and thriving?
I think that one of the key ones will be, and you've got to constantly monitor it. It's interesting that if you maybe do a chocolate bar, you can determine the sales in the first 3 months. But when you actually change a community, it's many years to do that sort of assessment of what quality of life are people having with regard to their income, what engagement do people have in social connection, and maybe contributing to, say, things like sports clubs. What sort of increase in success do you have with the kids at the local school, the marks they're getting and how they're compared within the state? And so they're the sort of things, particularly with regard to education of younger people, I would love to be able to kind of assess, over the next handful of years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of touching on an area I've been doing a little bit of reading on lately, which is social equity, and the fact that economies that have high levels of social equity being the fact that you can shake hands with someone and have an agreement as opposed to needing to write up a contract. The higher social equity is in a community, the healthier it is as an economy. Is that sort of the space that you're touching on there?
Yeah, I think that a rising tide lifts all boats, as the saying goes. And we really have a lot of potential to create opportunities for so many people in our communities, but there kind of needs to be a sense that we're actually all in it together. There's not that, we're not in India, we're not in a caste system, although sometimes it can feel like it. I believe that we can't rely on government. I'm not sort of full anti-government by any means. In fact, I work a lot with government at different levels, and I think there are some incredibly smart, well-intentioned people there that are doing some incredible things. But at the same way we can't rely on commercial enterprise and we can't rely on government, I think that there's a kind of balance of influences that we can draw from that will help enable us to kind of improve the sort of quality and experiences that we create in our communities. But we can't rely on either. We actually have to do it as a community.
And so I'm actually going to ask a question from a government employee point of view, and we've got a very enthusiastic government employee saying to me, I want to take a place branding project, I want to place brand for our community and get a project going, get it underway, but the powers that be are finding it hard to understand where the return on investment's going to come. What sort of advice would you have for them to take to the powers that be to convince them that undertaking a place branding project would be of worth?
Yeah, good question. I'm sure that pretty much exactly as you said it, that question's been posed many times, particularly in that context, especially where government's concerned. I guess my view is always a strong narrative and place branding is never more critical to a city's success. So if you actually think about what's happening around the world, there are probably something like 3,000 cities targeting talent and investment. and it's a very competitive market out there. So I'm kind of quite shocked, and I commonly hear, quite business-minded people failing to understand the power and the importance of a great place brand. So, we don't want our cities to flounder, against better branded, more engaging cities. We really want to ensure that those kind of social and economic benefits can actually be delivered, and a place brand is a key tool to help achieve that. So, from my point of view, place branding helps to shape a community. It increases economic opportunities for citizens and for businesses at all different scales. And it can create competitive commercial advantages, communicating why people should visit, open a business, or even invest money there, again, at different levels. And these are the sort of things that actually help future-proof your city. And this is how you ensure success now, but not just for the coming years, but for the coming decades. So my view is that, look, place branding is a non-negotiable factor for any city wishing to prosper, and the right outcome will deliver an improved reputation, increased civic pride, and a phenomenal opportunity for the citizens and the businesses in that place from a financial point of view. And you've just got to look at, from a global point of view, cities like Amsterdam or New York or Berlin, and imagine if they didn't have such powerful place brands. Would they really be as economically buoyant? Like, they would be great cities. That might not change so much, but would they be seen as successful and economically buoyant cities if they didn't have such strong place brands?
Yeah, great point. That's perhaps the compelling one to put straight to senior management right there, I reckon. Andy, I might just touch on the conference again. You're speaking to us on the Thursday, and Hubs of Health, place branding strategies at the heart of knowledge and health precincts is what we're hearing from you on. Could you run us by what we can expect from that session?
Sure. Look, I've been really interested in health and knowledge precincts or innovation precincts for some time. We've been lucky enough to work on a number of them, and they're, very substantial projects. Sometimes, literally billions of dollars are being spent on these. They're kind of little ecosystems of communities in themselves, often consisting of a hospital and a university as the kind of basis for this idea of health and knowledge. But what we need is not just two large organisations as facilities. We actually need the fine grain. We need the small stuff. We need the little businesses, the laneways, the small enterprises. We need, co-housing. We need different types of accommodation. We need to actually support entrepreneurs. Organisations don't just turn up and say, I'll take 10,000 square metres of space. Yes, you do want to attract those big businesses because they're the ones that fund, ongoing investment. But ongoing investment is not always just about finance. It's also about ideas and people. And so to get the right ideas and people, and, you need both social infrastructure and hard infrastructure, meaning you need places to go out and drink beer and eat food and have fun, but you need public transport and facilities and amenity. And so for me, I think the ingredients need to be more fine grain than just thinking about these big box established components, which are the basis of all health and knowledge precincts. But we need to actually think more about people and how we can actually increase diversity of experiences to actually make these places attractive.
Yeah, there's a sense of humanising it in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, Andy, I think I've probably taken enough of your time, but the one thing I will ask, The Place Economy Volume 3, when can we expect it out? And is there a story, I'm going to ask you to name the favourite of your children here, I think, but is there a story within that Volume 3 that's really got you excited that we should be looking out for?
Oh, God. I'm usually focused on the stories that I'm working on this week, as opposed to maybe ones that I probably dearly love that haven't touched on for 6 months. There are some, like there's a phenomenal town in an unheard of province within Russia that we've done a big case study on, where there's been a a beautiful piece of architecture and public realm created for the youth of that city. And that's something I think people won't know much about. We've got an amazing kind of mixed-use precinct with kind of sustainability at its heart in Osaka. We've got some stories about rethinking about the kind of financial models of property development so we can actually think more about how to achieve affordability. We have at one very end of the extreme, we're working on a big story about homelessness in women over the age of 55, how it occurs, what we can do about it, and how we can actually create solutions that actually ensure that this massive problem that exists in places like Australia isn't further exacerbated. And so we've brought in a number of thought leaders to kind of brainstorm solutions on how we can engage government in investment and development to actually collaborate on better solutions to achieve the outcomes that we need in society. But yet we've also got a whole section on what does it take to make an Instagrammable place? You know, what are those sort of beautiful moments that you can't help but take a photo of it because they're just so dynamic, so beautiful, so magnetic. So you can kind of tell that just from those couple of simple examples, the book does cross a lot of divides. It covers a lot of themes. It is a monster. It's been an enormous amount of work, but I think it's something that I'll eventually be really proud to share with people.
Oh, it's really exciting. Really looking forward to it being released. And for anyone that hasn't come across The Place Economy yet, you've got volumes 1 and 2 that you can buy now on the Hoyne website, I'd imagine.
That's it.
Right?
Yep. Look, they're $200, but 100% of your money goes to Habitat for Humanity. We do not keep a cent, not a cent. And if you're a student, it's $75. So yeah, they're not inexpensive. They probably cost more than that to actually create, to be completely frank. But I think that if people believe they're getting a pretty big chunk of thought leadership delivered to them, and that their money is going to more than an incredibly worthy cause, then hopefully people feel good about that.
Oh, look, I must say, personally, they're more than good value at $200. The amount of information, and they're encyclopedias of place, really, and what you've brought together there is really quite remarkable. So from a personal point of view, I'd say it's pretty good value, and for students, wow, it's a pretty good deal too for $70. So congratulations on them, Andy. We're thrilled to have you as part of the conference in it's under a month now. So we'll see you down in Hobart. Can't wait to hear you speak and hear your reflections on place with your fellow place branders down in Hobart at the Grand Chancellor Hotel.
Thanks, Stu. It's so kind of you to invite me on. And I've got to say, I think Hobart is one of the most exciting places in all of Australia. And for everybody who's going to be attending the conference, my advice, do what I'm doing. Add an extra 3 or 4 days on. Stick around, drink some whiskey, drink some wine, eat some incredible food. There's no fresher, more natural place in this country. And it's just such a joy. And you know what? Super friendly people.
There's been some good advice dished out in this podcast, but that's probably the best advice of all, I'd say, at the end of that. That's funny. I think I'll be joining you for a whiskey as well. But thanks again, Andy. It's been a real pleasure, and we'll see you in Hobart.
Thanks again.
Place branding. Australia. Place branding. Australia.